I'm George Stamos. Thanks for coming. I'm a partner at Gibson Dunn, and we're delighted that my dear friend Andrew has taken time from one of the most amazing schedules you can possibly imagine, which we'll talk about in a minute, to join us tonight and talk about his new book, which is extraordinarily compelling. I have my dog-eared copy right here. I'm not kidding about that. I usually start books and it takes me a while to get through them. This one I got through on a relatively long flight with lots of notes inside. In fact, I'll share that with you, Andrew. Andrew is, as I said, he went from being a frenetic Fortune 50 CEO, retired, and immediately became an even more frenetic sort of man of the world with an array of responsibilities that are kind of hard to imagine. That includes, of course, all of his work as a senior advisor to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. It includes him being chairman of Lucid. It includes the board of IBM. The list goes on and on. Most importantly, Andrew and I co-founded the Hellenic Initiative. And that is our host tonight. So we're all here for THI. Thank you. Recognize a lot of the faces here. The one thing that Andrew's book doesn't do, which I was looking forward to, was to talk about time management, which would have really helped me a lot. But that has to be your next book, Andrew. It's going to take you quite some time to talk about time management. So, Andrew, we're going to open the floor to some questions, but I'd like to get into it a little bit, if I may.
Please, George.
Because I have heard some of your speeches, maybe more than I like to think of. But as I read your book, I was struck by the juxtaposition of a CEO. Hello, son Gregory. A CEO who was in the trenches of warfare, probably more than any other CEO I've ever known, who dealt with internal insurrection, outside forces, 2008, Kuwait reneging. I don't think, Barbara, we were counsel on that one, but we might have been. Either side, I'm not sure. And yet, when I read your book, it, in many ways, you're adopting a number of positions that would be antithetical to kind of the classic corporate C-suite that you and I grew up with and learned to love. You actually talk about higher taxes, perhaps doing away with carried interest. You talk about maybe share buybacks is not a good idea. You talk about how fiduciary duty maybe extends beyond shareholders to stakeholders. So in this disruption and this really extraordinary book, I highly recommend it to everybody. It really is thought-provoking. What's going on?
Well, firstly, thank you, George, brother, partner, friend, soulmate. Hellenics and Hellenes and Philhellenes share a sense of history together. And so what caused us to find THI and what we did is embedded in my answer to that question. Why us? Why not us? Okay. 2,500 years of history doesn't get defined with 10 or 15 years of political mismanagement and 20, 30 years of economic mismanagement, ethnicity, DNA, what makes society prevail through wars and downturns and bad leaders is something way beyond the system that they live within at that moment. So tying that thought to your question, my big thought around this book and why I wrote it was that my 14 and a half years of living a very capitalistic world, running a big American corporate, that the sense of our ability to operate in the 21st century with the rule books that were put together last century is reaching an asymptote and may well be over. And there are signs everywhere for that. And these are the disruptions I talk about in there. And what I try to do at DAO was shift DAO to the 21st century and adopt a rule book that was not given to me by any peer. It was endorsed by a board that I remade, and there's a whole chapter on boards in there that talks about ultimately what I'm calling an enlightened board. And I can talk about what an enlightened board means, we'll get to it. And this license to operate as an entity, as a person, as a human system, an enterprise, public or privately owned, is changing. And what I'm trying to do is do exactly the way you reacted to reading the book, which is challenge the norms, challenge the rule books that were put together by, let's call it, the leaders, and mostly men, mostly white men, post-World War II. That the conventions that gave birth to the United Nations and all the acronyms out there, WHO, WTO, name it, are out, they're gone. And our license to operate as an institution needs to be rethought. I do not have all the answers in there. I have what I hope is the beginning of firm conversation and debate. I'm literally watching in the last, 12 days, how I'm starting to get some light bulbs going off. I'm getting calls from people who are saying, what are you thinking? You've made money out of doing this. Okay, you're a rich man because of this. And I said, I am way too rich for what I did. Okay, that's back to this taxes point. I'm from Greek immigrant parents. You see it in the book. We came from lower working class family. I worked my butt off, maybe smarter than the average bear. I got lucky along the way. And this great American institution called DAO gave me the chance to absolutely, totally earn what I fought for and earned. But having said that, the economic model is broken. The top 27 people in this world have as much money as the 3.8 billion at the lower part of the economic equation. So 27 people, 3.8 billion. Okay, there's something broken about that. And what we have to do as humans is actually start challenging the conventions and the norms. And in the book, I talk about, that's why it's called disruption, or leading through disruption. I talk about all the disruptions that are throwing out the playbooks. Ask me about any of them. China, digital, environmental management, what we do about it. And we just can't just talk it and do nothing, okay? Which is I also talk about in the book. Social justice, equality for all, not just one particular type of person, but all people. How to bring everyone along. Who's doing it? Who's actually writing the rules? I guarantee you, it isn't Washington, it isn't Brussels, it isn't Beijing, it isn't Riyadh, it isn't Dubai. Everybody's writing their own rules for themselves. And if we head down that path, we'll lose the license to operate and make money. And I'm threatening the model of capitalism, okay, by saying if you sit outside of that and operate to last century's rules, you will lose the license to operate.
So you see the business leadership of having a much stronger role than it's ever had before.
Yeah, very much so. You quite rightly said in your first question that I'm, maybe it's I'm a masochist. I'm a disruptor. I'm a risk taker. I'm probably at the edge, hopefully not the bleeding edge, but at the leading edge of challenging what the role of a business leader should be. I only got there because I'll summarize the book. We are not in the new norm is the new abnorm. The new paradigm and the new reality is a lack of leadership and a vacuum of leadership. The new solution and where we go is someone has to take leadership and define the new rule book. Who? Government, I got to tell you, I would challenge you, write it down on a piece of paper and give it to me later. Name me 5 political leaders you admire and put them down on a piece of paper. Okay?
A couple of them are dead. I can't think of the other ones.
Okay, living in power, okay, today, okay? Because I'm with you. We've had a whole genre of political leaders over the last 70 years that That 5 would be an easy challenge. But remember, they were leading us post-World War II to this massive prosperity dividend that we've all benefited from. The train wreck that's arrived is the successive leaders haven't realized that change is now a constant. Uncertainty is now all the time. Just look at this century, 9/11, the global financial crisis, the activist slash short-term hedge fund interventions in financial management, the pandemic, the emergence of China, and then Russia invading Ukraine. That's all in 23 years. So I think what's happening is the absence of political leadership. Society is saying, hey, I'm not treated fairly. I want someone to fix it. But we don't want socialism, check. We don't want unbridled capitalism where a few get richer all the time. Okay, maybe some of the people in the room want that. Okay, but I'll guarantee you society doesn't want that. So then you say, who's going to lead? So I put the premise in the book that business enterprises like Dow, like IBM, like Procter & Gamble, like the big storied American enterprises, JP Morgan. I mean, we have been around for decades because we were willing to change the model. And there are a dozen to 2 dozen to 3 dozen CEOs and boards that I see out there that are challenging the premise that we win, everyone else loses.
So when let's look at Bidenomics a little bit. You've been close to a lot of presidents. I think probably the first week Biden was elected, you got a phone call. I remember when you got that phone call. And what was that all about? And how did that lead to Build Back Better and the Inflation Reduction Act and all that incredible Shakespearean play?
Vice President Biden under President Obama indicated, in his whole mantra as a politician, that he was pro what I guess we now call advanced industrial policy, that he understood what my first book was about, which is that America was a terrific innovation activity and enterprise, not because it invented the best capital allocation financial system, but it invented the best widget. That our ability to innovate and invent widgets, namely whatever you want to define as a widget, but a manufactured something, had disappeared. And by the time President Obama became president, manufacturing represented 11% of the American economy. It's now up around 16, 17%, so it's making a comeback. What, of course, President Biden was realizing is the jobs ratio of people employed in manufacturing created 8 jobs around that manufacturing enterprise, that the service sector, every job in service creates 1.3 jobs around it. So that delta meant jobs were moving and leaving, not because of labor cost, but because it was not economic anymore to invest in manufacturing and factories in the United States, that we didn't have the tax policies, the regulatory policies, the energy policies, the labor policies, the education system to invest in science and the new widgets. And so that offshoring was to do with a competitor, China, and frankly, the Southeast Asians and the East Asian tigers really doubling down on that. And we missed batteries, we missed solar, we missed a whole bunch of new technologies. And interestingly enough, the ones we didn't miss, we still offshored, like semiconductors, and I'm on the board of IBM, as you said. So what we have now realized and have come back to under President Biden was why the call happened in the first day, because they basically said, we're going to bring manufacturing back and onshore. The pandemic exposed us and brought vulnerability in the supply chains. And it may cost more in the short term, but it'll pay back over the long term. The book is riddled with the thesis that we need people who are willing to invest in the long term and maybe take the hit in the short term, which I was willing to do as a CEO, because I was not popular in Wall Street, because my investors wanted the return every 90 days on profit. Okay? They wanted share buyback, they wanted increased dividend, and they didn't really care that I put $25 billion in Saudi Arabia. Actually, they cared, They said, why the hell are you doing that? Give us the share buyback. So this notion of President Biden that we should actually do, let's call it the equivalent of a New Deal with the infrastructure the Infrastructure Build Together Act, and then of course CHIPS Act, and then now the, of course, poorly named Inflation Reduction Act. Those three things is probably the most top-down policy generation out of Washington that we've seen in 6 or 7 decades.
But what's this coalition that you built at that time? I mean, who was part of your coalition
So
of the
12
willing, I like to say?
12 CEOs from each sectors who had my playbook, or I had their playbook. So, you know, Mary Barr, and, you know, the CEO of Salesforce, Mark Benioff, and people who thought and acted the way I did. See, I would go to Washington like throughout my CEO tenure, and it felt like root canal surgery every time. It was just excruciating how, and I'm dealing with this now in one of the jobs that you didn't mention in my opening with the Olympics, right? I'm dealing with excruciating, painful bureaucracy, because bureaucrats exist in systems.
He's running the Australian Olympics, and he's in love with everybody. So it's fine. It's all good over there.
Yeah, it's going great. It's Chatham House.
It's Chatham House.
Yeah, so
I forgot to say that.
Well, it's okay.
It's being recorded, but it's Chatham House.
I'm known for speaking my mind. I think bureaucracy and institutional control, so nothing changes, is something which I think Washington mastered. So I found the CEOs who knew how to deal with it, mostly from my dealings with them at the Business Roundtable. I mean, to your point about having a problem with some of the statements I made about stakeholder versus shareholder, I will remind you that the BRT 4 years ago came under Jamie Dimon.
I'm well aware.
And made statements not too dissimilar to what's in that book. Now, the difference between what happened 4 years ago and what I'm suggesting in this book is I've actually got things you can do to change things in this book. Because I talk about the 5 Ds, right? And bureaucrats stop, right? So first D is denial. The second D is you start to figure it out, defiance, because it ain't good. By definition, it's not good. Doesn't matter what it is, it's just not good. Because you're making money out of what you're doing. Then you finally say, these are not going away. So then we have debate. Guess what law firms do? So you know,
by the hour.
And then ultimately you get to, okay, this is now, we're going to come up with an answer. So we're going to give this the runaround, and we're going to have endless discussions. There's the 4 Ds. So getting caught in that loop where nothing happens, but a lot of headlines get written. A lot of people think you're doing something. What I have in the book is practical solutions on what to do, the 50. Okay, we're tired of think tanks. We need do tanks. What the hell does a do tank look like? Coalition of like-minded people. Those CEOs that we called to get the policy through the Senate basically had the street cred to call the Republican side of the House and the Democrat side of the House and be seen as for country, not for party or for their company. One of the hardest things to do as a CEO is don't just speak your book. It's obvious you'll speak your book, okay? People who want you to speak the book. To go to that transcendental thought that I'm not just going to speak my company, I'm actually not just going to speak my sector, I'm going to speak for all sectors because there's a greater good. If there's a greater good, then there will be more money for everyone. Your share of the pie may not be, okay, what you wanted in the first go. So a better tax regime, and a better regulatory regime, a better energy policy, a better industrial policy, a better labor policy. If I speak that book and put practical answers, in the short term, it may not be good for my company. So these CEOs saw that speaking pan-sector on the better policies for the entire country. When you're a Republican or Democrat, how can you fight that?
Right, and so it was compromise. It was the art of the compromise.
It was the art of bringing people along such that they took no personal risk. Most people, and you're saying, you know, this is off the record, but I'll go one little step on my home country of Australia. I am shocked going back to my home country at how benign we are and how spineless we are in taking on the establishment. In that regard, America's great, okay? America's great because, okay, we're not perfect, but we do have a class, an entrepreneurial class, a sense of this is not right, that we'll speak up. Australia's got it so well, so complacent, and frankly, being a farm, a mine, and a hotel makes a ton of money for 25 million people. It doesn't want people like me to come in and disrupt.
So what happens if we don't do some of these things?
Well, I think we're getting.
What does 2034 look like?
So in the book, my final chapter is what's the future, and I finish optimistically. I think people like me, if you're not an optimist, you start to slash your wrists on this sort of stuff, and so you literally have to answer a question like that by saying it'll be better because new systems will form. I propose in the book. Just take one, geopolitics. Okay, give me your collective view on the fix with China. Okay, what's the playbook to fix the US-China relationship?
Economics.
Okay, now if the Chinese say, I don't trust you anymore, okay, I'll take your economics, I'll take your technology, I'll take your ideas, okay, and I want you to be subservient to my rules, deal in my currency, my human capital system, my resources, all of that. What do you do then?
Well, I think there are checks and balances in place that prevent them from really doing that if they're realistic and they have 1.6 billion people, whatever it is, to take care of.
Have you met President Xi Jinping?
Have not.
Yeah, so he is. Putin is totally off the reservation, right, in terms of his ego. Xi has an ego 1,000 times Putin's. Okay, so this is a guy who is an absolute ruler of 1.3 billion people and is designing a system that relegates the US to second. Okay, now
they got a lot of their money invested in our treasuries.
Yeah, which will watch. You asked me what will happen by 2030. There'll be way less of the money in US treasuries. Okay, and just as Japan tried it, right? But Japan couldn't do it, couldn't wean itself off the US. So Japan stayed in our orbit. Now, who's the first to put up their hand to have the US help? Japan, right? You got to remember, China was the ruler of most of the last 500, 600 years before it got colonized by the West. They are still upset at how they get treated by the West.
So a mutual friend of yours and mine wrote a book called 2034, Admiral Stavridis, former head of NATO. And in his book, in the last chapter, fascinating novelette or docu-novel, whatever you call it, he predicts it's all about India in 2034.
Look, my book talks about that, but doesn't say it's all about one country. I'm saying
not all about, but they really emerge as.
Yeah, sure. And if you go to India, and you'll see that a chaotic democracy full of corruption will eventually find its bearings, and they are weaning themselves off of Russia. There's another book out which you should read, Niall Ferguson's book, The West and the Rest, which speaks to my book, which is there's us in the West who have now had 70, 80 years of dominance, and the rest, okay, Saudi Arabia, China, these countries are establishing their own rules.
Right.
And the sooner we start to put the two lenses on, West, great. I'm not saying give up on us. In fact, what I'm saying is we will still be winners, but that other lens better be wide open. So how do you answer my own rhetorical question? Okay, if you're a company wanting to do business in China, like I advise people, we were talking about Saudi Arabia before we started, learn their rules. Step one. Step two, make a conscious choice about whether you want to follow those rules. Step three, once you've made that conscious choice and have decided I am making a bet on following part or all of what I see in there is okay, to your point on checks and balances, don't risk the farm, don't risk the entire shop.
So before we turn to the audience, maybe a question or two, talking about the future.
Yeah.
AI.
So I just finished a board meeting, IBM board meeting yesterday, and left that board meeting with yet again the realization that generative AI, which ChatGPT, of course, is the first product, and IBM just announced our product, Watson X, is the first signal that we're replaceable. Okay, I mean, I'll give you the anecdote straight out of the boardroom.
I think I'll drink a little more on that.
That was a lot of fun. An unnamed director sitting next to me in a review that was going on in the boardroom, after I asked a question to the presenter, leaned over to me and showed me the device and said, I asked ChatGPT the following question: what would Andrew Liveris ask this presenter in terms of a question? It was exactly the question I asked. I'm redundant as a board member. If the AI product could fundamentally source everything about me and nail me that close, it was exactly the question I'd just asked.
Okay, so if that's the case, and you and I are insufferable optimists, both of us, what's your advice to the young people in the room around AI?
It's a bit like a conversation I was having about fighting aging and reversing aging. And I'm on a foundation board, the Saudis are funding that. Between AI and biology and the intersection of man, human, and machine on AI and biology, we're heading for a tectonic shift on the human species. And for me, in the book, I talk about that marriage of biology and digital optimistically. So what I'd say to young people, and what we teach at the academy I've created, is the opportunities will be boundless. Okay, it will be boundless, but there's no guarantee that this is going to serve all of humanity right and correctly. So then go to the other side of you. So this is why the book has got some controversy, and say, yes, you make money out of AI and biology coming together. You go fund or be part of the funding that absolutely totally takes advantage of these technology collisions that are going on. But then find a way to get the other side of it to serve, to enable the person who can't access it. Go serve on a community something. Go serve on a philanthropy something. Go serve, get elected for local office. Become the educated in these tectonic shifts. Everyone in this room, I would guarantee, is, however you got here, at the fact that you're in this room, you're privileged. Okay? And you are by far the minority. By far. So just like they have in schools, you know, the big brother, big sister program, where an older child adopts a younger child, or a person who, you know, is doing better, help someone who's not. We've got to buddy up with the billions of humans in some way. And I'm not calling writing checks and being a philanthropist. Yes, I am talking about that. And I'm not talking about the Buffett program of giving back billions. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about individually finding someone not as well off as you, who won't access this revolution that's going on, and it is a revolution. And that's how I finished the book. And then help everyone else get to the rising tide lifts all boats part of this conversation. And if you do that, yes, George, you're right. Your very first question. This capitalist is not a mercenary. This capitalist is not for hire. This capitalist isn't a win-lose capitalist. This capitalist is redefining what a win-win looks like this century by what's going on in this century. And if you read the book and say, oh shit, excuse the French, there's a lot going on and I can take advantage of that, that's how I finished the book.
Well, it's a very, very compelling book. Any questions from the floor? Here we are.
Thank you for speaking. And I wanted to ask this question on the topic of your book, and also because we're all Hellenes here. So on the topic of AI, I think one of the biggest issues facing the youth is how quickly we have to progress through our careers. So we're actually competing with AI, like you just mentioned. It can come up with a question that you can ask, and it makes it very difficult to make time, for example, for your community and for families. And when you have to switch companies every few years and never take a break, you can already see Greece was on the trajectory of basically going extinct with our fertility rates. We also see that in the Greek American population. So we'd just like your thoughts on how we manage AI, but continue as a robust community.
Yeah, it's the juxtaposition. I talk about in the book intersections, and there's so many fissures and changes all colliding at once. You quickly get to the nature or the heart of your question, which you position it as either or. And you know, as Jim Collins wrote, I position the whole thesis as and. Now, I will grant you this, and he asked about time management at the very beginning. I am restless, mostly sleepless, and never stop trying to solve things like that because I am privileged. God gave me some intellect. God got me to this point in my life through a marvelous career at a great company, and I could stop immediately right now.
No, you couldn't. I know you did.
Yeah, no, but mutations to one side and genetic flaws to one side, which I have plenty of them.
Hair on fire.
You know, I think your drive and your energy to make the choice at the intersection is what I'm counseling you to do. Not all community, not all the work, not all the career, and don't worry about the AI piece. Join the AI piece and help solve some of this stuff. That's the opportunity that presents itself right now, which, by the way, means our education system is not teaching young graduates how to do that at all. That's why I created this academy. I mean, I went to quite a few universities. I was a trustee of a couple of them. Caltech, I was on the trustee board of Caltech. And I was seeing what they were teaching, which was ridiculous, which was vertical. Become a PhD, the best scientist, and we need these people, but not everybody. You know, we invented a term at Dow called solutionist. Joel, you remember it, which is stop bringing me the damn problem, give me the solution. Okay, you're getting paid to give me a solution, not to repeat the problem. Why do I need you if all you're doing is repeating the problem, which is obvious? Okay? So drive yourself to that spot. I know I'm not giving you an easy answer. I'm probably not even going to give you a specific answer. But if you want to role model any in this nutcase, which is I relentlessly pursue the solution because it's there somewhere. That means go horizontal. Stop going vertical alone. It's the old football adage, go deep or wide. Well, you win football games by going deep and wide.
One more question, please.
So, excuse me. Speaking of disruption, there's no question that climate change has caused disruption on a global scale. As we speak, our country faces some of the most devastating wildfires we have seen in the past years. You have worked in engineering, science, and technology and are an expert in these fields. You have interacted with government, business leaders as well. How can business, government come together with science and technology and AI, as we just discussed, to find solutions to climate change in the future?
Yeah, the wildfires in Greece as we speak, but not just in Greece, the heat wave through most of the Northern Hemisphere. There's any climate deniers out there, I think people are starting to say this is not just a cycle. There's, you know, human interventions creating an amplification of warming and cooling, by the way. I just spent the weekend in Australia. It's bloody cold down there. So the other side of the world is getting cold, very cold in this time of year. So look, the book addresses that a bit, but just the quick answer is I serve on the board of Saudi Aramco and I serve on the board of an EV company. I do that so I can have two lenses. I can see what the hydrocarbons world is thinking and doing, and I can see what the electron world is doing. So the science answer in simplest terms is we are in climate change having to solve it by solving electrons and molecules. Electrification and electrons alone does not solve the climate change issue. Just electrifying everything is creating actually more of a problem if you don't get the molecules right. Getting the molecules right, you cannot get the molecules right without a market signal. The market signal isn't a carbon tax. The market signal is a market price on carbon. Okay, so that's a very mandatory thing to get the economics right. If you do not send that signal, whether it be in a country, in a region, for sure the world, if the global institution doesn't exist like the Paris Accords to send that signal, then the only answer is what President Biden has done here in the US, which is a subsidy. I am going to make the economics on molecules work. So what molecules? Well, engineer in me, it's very simple. Anything without a C in it. Okay. Well, there's only two of those. Hydrogen. So here we go. The checks are being written to create blue, green, gray hydrogen to the gazoo. We've got to write a few more checks, taxpayer dollar, to fund the pipelines. We've got to do a lot of conversion of power plants, on and on and on. The second is nuclear and small modular reactors. And what Bill Gates is suggesting is very real. And scaling those and retrofitting old coal-fired power plants to nuclear is a must. If I get some sort of subsidy, which IRA does, and I focus on the molecule side, not just the electron side, and I was with the DOE last week, I'm still advising them on this, how we can actually put the molecular change in place, then I'm an optimist that we can hit the 2030 goals. But that needs a global effort, and here where my big downside risk is. You ask about China and ask about India. Neither of those countries, okay, are going to get rid of carbon. They are basically making the argument that I need it for my industrial development, and you guys are the ones that polluted the last 100 years. You take care of it. Okay, that's back to their own rules. So I don't see China or India shutting down coal, oil, or gas in any time frame short of 2060, 2070. We're going to have a lot of natural disasters between now and then, to your point. But look, optimist, it's hard to stay optimistic after what I just said, but you can, because this is where the policies you can affect. And I'm all for intervention from the top if I can get a price on carbon. I'm a great believer in direct air capture as a technology to invest in. And I'm a great believer in carbon capture and storage as a technology to invest in. And as we speak, big oil is investing both of those.
How about nuclear? Nuclear.
Yeah, SMRs. So that's the nuclear.
You said SMR? I totally agree with that.
So, yeah.
Sorry.
No, I got in trouble back in Australia on the weekend because I said all of the above includes nuclear. In Australia, we're brain dead on the word nuclear. We think it means Chernobyl. Back to my home country.
Any last questions? Nick.
So Andrew, I'm betting you know Nicholas Burns, the ambassador to China, who was the former ambassador to Greece, and one of the finest diplomats the United States has. I've got to believe he has played a huge role in the back channel in creating the environment where Blinken was able to visit and Yellen was able to visit. So back to George's original question of how do you deal with China? What's he advising us to be doing?
So the us in that, and I'm totally with you on Nick Burns. He's class act, one of the great diplomats of the United States has generated in the last many dozen years. The us is American business or American enterprise. The reality is that he can do very little to bring back the dynamic that we had a dozen years ago. When Hank Paulson was, Secretary Treasury of the Secretary, and we had him and Secretary of State Clinton, I think it was. No, it wasn't Clinton. It was Secretary of State with Paulson under Bush.
Condoleezza Rice, I believe.
It was Condoleezza Rice. We went all the time. We went to the Chinese, to Beijing. American business got direct contact with the president and the premiers and the vice premiers. And we had the ability to influence their central planning council with great inputs on technology, sustainability, digital, you name it. Nick can't resurrect that. The Chinese are basically saying, I don't want to deal with you guys with IBM as IBM. I want to deal with Elon Musk and Tesla, okay, because I need his technology. And by the way, BYD is going to learn from him and basically kill him in the marketplace. If you haven't followed BYD, Buffett's big bet, they are going to be the winner in the EV space. But unless you've got something like that, you're not invited in. The Chinese have come up the technology scale so fast with their design institutes. Okay, in 1990, there was, I said in the book, 4 foreign-owned labs, R&D labs in China. In 2010, there were 40,000. The design institutes in China in 1990 were 1. Today, they are 100,000. The 100,000 design institutes have stolen every piece of technology out of the 40,000 foreign-owned labs and replicated it in their own form, and now have all the technology they need. So we've lost all leverage. Apart from the treasury point, which is valid, we have no technology leverage with the Chinese anymore. And that, unfortunately, means we have no hand to play. So I think the hand we should play is our hand. This country is a gigantic market with major technology disruption that we're basically in the middle of, has basically a business leadership that has a value system that respects humanity, that purpose-driven business, despite George's point about fiduciary duty, okay, leads us to actually be the employers of choice. People around the world want to come and join American companies. And we have developed a system of value sharing with partners, Japan, India, Australia, EU. We've got plenty of market without China. So I'm not saying we ignore China. I'm just saying we deal with China in this new form. That's my wake-up call in the book. And if Nick was here, and he's heard me actually say this, and Kevin Rudd, I was with Kevin Rudd last week. He's the other big China hand. He totally agrees with it.
One last question, I think, please. Oh,
how's it going, Andrew?
We have to get the book. We have to get the book signing. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
We have to get the book signing.
Okay.
I'm going to put my hand to work.
Really quick. So in the beginning, you mentioned that corporations should be leaders. So, for example, in terms of social justice, on the one hand, you have a company like Coinbase that has said this, said, leave me alone regarding like ESG. Let me focus on operating the company that, we were built to do. And on the other hand, you have a lot of people that believe that major corporations should be playing a large role in social justice. So when you say be a leader, what duty do you think that major corporations have to the public?
So I find the topic, and it's first chapter in the book for a reason. I hate this new fad of ours that everything has to be a fad. Okay, I'm from the world of substance. I've spent an entire career learning things before I open my mouth. I'm now writing because I've got a few years of experience on a lot of those topics. And what I hate is the shortcut, okay, that gets us to this discussion that says ESG is bad for these reasons. Well, whoever's writing about that, what the hell do they know about E, S, and G? What the hell do they know about what it takes? In Dow, we have 150 communities around the world we operated in. The communities, community advisory panels, consisting of local people who we would sit with, okay, on a monthly basis to listen to how we could be a good neighbor, a good partner, a good investor, an employer of themselves if they were working for us, or their children if they wanted to work for us. We favored our communities and uplifted the economic model of what became, not just in America, around the world. We exported this. That's ESG, okay? And then when we looked at ourselves and said, you know what? When we go to, pick your favorite country, Thailand, which I ran for a while, why would we change that model? Why would we go to Thailand and operate to the Thai standard of treating people, with regulatory environments that were more benign. Go over to another industry. Why would you go and build shoe factories in Indonesia and child labor? Why would you do that deliberately? Would your shareholder, if they found out you were doing that, would they look at you and say, I'm going to invest in that company? No. So this transparency of high standard, I happen to think American companies in the main that have lasted 100 years, like a Dow, go to the highest standard all the time. So that's ESG to me. And so environment, social, and governance. Why is this becoming the topic? Climate brought environment to the fore. The climate topic. In the book, I talk about footprint and blueprint. When we were growing up in business, post-World War II, the asset we cared about the most was our footprint. Our building, our factory, our trucks, our transport footprint. Through the evolution of knowledge of what we were doing to the environment, mostly in the Clinton years, but even first Bush, they formed the view that EPA and regulatory environments and the science of understanding toxicity meant that products were affecting humans. What you wore, what you ingested, what was around you in the air, okay, these were things that needed to be regulated. We at Dow took the lead and started developing the science to take formaldehyde out of this environment. I bet you if you check for formaldehyde in this environment, okay, you'd still find it. Why? Because the science of detection has improved to parts per trillion. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, it was parts per million. In the 80s, 90s, 00s, parts per billion. Now parts per trillion. But what does that mean? That means our products are out there affecting humans. That's the handprint. At Dow, what we said was, that's not good enough. I've got to work with the regulatory agencies, not just to regulate the exposure to humans of products, handprint, or my factories and my community and what they get exposed to by being next door to my factory. I've got to actually take care of the planet. The planet became the boundary, blueprint. Every company on this planet has to develop a strategy around blueprint and put a value to nature. Because right now, water, trees, land, air are not in the economic model of building a building or a factory or a railway or a new airport, not in the value proposition. In the book, I show 2 pilots we ran with the Nature Conservancy about putting in metrics to value what the planet has given us. Raises the bar on the economic decision. That's back to economics. Economics done that way changes what you'll do. That, for me, Warren Buffett, expect what you inspect. That'll change behavior on E, S, and G. And I can go, because we don't have the time, I can go down to a whole discussion on S and a whole discussion on G, both big G and little g. Okay? And again, read the book because it's all in there.
Thank you.
And if we do that, we'll never get to book signing, which is very important. Andrew, I can't thank you enough for an extraordinary presentation.